In this episode of Carnage, we've got a brand new gearbox to stick in the Trolvo, and it's awesome! Hey guys, and welcome to 2021. That's right, it's a new year, and this is the first Carnage episode of the year. We can all agree 2020 was a bit shit, and it can get in the bin. We're going to turn things around with the Trolvo. This is our 1983 Volvo that we bought as an unfinished project, and it was part of a package deal. We got the Barina and the Volvo for $1,500. So work out the split whichever way you want, but let's say $1,000 for that. It came with a 1JZ and the auto to suit. It was bolted into the car, let's say bolted very loosely into the car, but it wasn't wired, wasn't plumbed, didn't have a tail shaft, but we made all those things work. And we got it running, and it's a ripper. We took it to Summernats last year, did some mad burnouts down Skid Row once we got it up on the converter, and put it on the dyno, made 490 horsepower at the hub. So that was pretty healthy. But even if you think that's a bit happy, you know, hub dynos can give pretty high power figures. It's a genuine 400 horsepower at the rear wheels car, all right? So it is a serious bit of gear. Now, since then, we've tried a new converter, which obviously gets it up on boost a lot harder, which is great, but the autos are starting to feel the pain. They turn to jelly every time that we try and put power into these things, and the A340 that comes in behind the 1JZ, it's no good. It's not a good box. So, we've got a Turbo 400 here from All Fast Converters to replace it. That's right, this thing has been built to go behind that. It's going to handle more power than that engine can ever produce. In fact, we're going to future-proof it, maybe with some 2JZ power, but that is for a future day. In the meantime though, we're going to get this thing in that car, so let's get this up on the hoist, pull out that just very sad transmission, get the Turbo 400 into it. Let's go make some power with this thing, and then maybe we'll race it. So we've got a Turbo 400 to stick in this thing. So let's start by removing this A340. As you can see, already draining the transmission. Obviously we've got our battery disconnected because we need to undo the starter motor as well. Yeah, getting the old fluids out so we can drop this box down, put in some new fresh goodness. Bye-bye 340. It hasn't been fun. So obviously we're going to have to get a new tail shaft made up for this thing as well, so, son of a bitch, stripping. As I was saying, it looks like we'll have to get a new tail shaft made up because obviously it'll be different from Turbo 400 to this thing, so yeah, we'll have to go talk to our mates at GJ Drivelines, see what they can do for us. But anyway, a few more bolts and we'll have this thing out. Converter bolts. Right, where would we be without this transmission jack? I've got to say, it's an MVP in this workshop. Time for the big shaft. We tried, but at the end of the day, it just didn't want to work for us. Get off that. So, turbo 400 time. Right, so this is our new transmission. It's a turbo 400 built by the guys at All Fast Converters in WA. I've got some instructions here, I'll just cut them off. There we go, art for your car. All right, so they give me a whole bunch of stuff to make sure is right before we move forward. So I'll put that aside and I'll have a read of that in a bit. I've got a high stall converter there as well, obviously from them, and some Toyota badging because Simon from Allfast has himself a 12-second Camry, which is pretty quick, and he keeps threatening to bring it over and race it against Turbo Taxi, even though Turbo Taxi will cane its ass. But anyway, it's all good. It's all good fun. But yeah, ooh, that actually clipped off. Look at that. Sorry, Simon. Does this one fall off? It does too. There we go. No Toyota. Which is funny because it's got a 1JZ in the car. So anyway, got a couple ratchet straps here to do. We'll have to undo our ratchet straps. We'll pull the box out, have a look, read our instructions, make sure everything is sweet before we mate our converter up to the box and get our box into the car. And then the fun really begins because then we need a tail shaft and a transmission cross member and wire up our trans brake. Yes, it has a trans brake. Hallelujah. But yeah, Simon has built us some awesome boxes before, especially the one in the MX-5 over there. The Power Glide in the MX-5 has never had an issue. Simon built that quite a few years ago, and it has been mint no matter what engine we've had in front of it. You know, twin turbo LS or turbo Barras, whatever. We've leaned on them, we've drifted them, we've done everything with it. Box has been perfect. So I expect nothing less from this bad boy. So allegedly, the story goes, this will be good for 1,200 horsepower. 1,200 horsepower. There we have our converter. Wow, it's so tiny. So we are about to fit our Turbo 400 into the Trolvo. Obviously, torque converter's got to go in first, so we'll do that in a sec. But here's a couple little traps for young players we just want to talk about. Obviously, being a 400 with a JZ bell housing attached to the front is a non-standard fitment. So this dipstick tube obviously does not line up with the hole on the bell housing, as you can see. Also, we've got our trans fittings here. Now we've got two little -6 AN fittings. Now in the earlier Turbo 400s, that fitting would be an MPT fitting, so tapered thread. When I put a tapered thread fitting in there just loosely, it went in way too deep, like much deeper than you'd expect a tapered thread to be, which made me question it. And I looked it up, and the later Turbo 400s use a straight thread like that with a washer, and that's what we have here. So it's just something you need to look at, whether your box is an old box or a new box. You're just going to make sure you've got the right fitting for the right thread, and eventually I'll get this right and screw it in. Get in there. You can do it. Trying to do it from the back side. Anyway, all right, so we'll tighten them up in a sec, but otherwise it's pretty much ready to go in the car. We will fit this in the car rather than try and squeeze it in while it's all outside. So sit that off to the side. But once it's in the car, we can sort out our tail shaft length, we can sort out our cross member. Should be all good, and then we can wire up our trans brake. But those are all future Scotty problems. Today, Scotty is fitting a box. All right, so we're going to put this converter in the box. I'm going to tip in a cup full of fluid first. Make sure she's got some lube in there before we go turning it. Broke the seal. Valvoline, of course. Whoops. And I missed it. Oh no! I've made all sorts of messes. All right. Wow, that was messy. There we go. Valvoline, you know what I mean. Now, it's always a good idea to look into the front of the box and see the pump orientation for the tangs on the pump drive, and then line it up kind of in that ballpark. So you can then, okay. That would be it. Yep, that's looking pretty good. All right, so bolting the 400 up to our 1JZ for the first time. And it all seems to be going together pretty well. Just making sure we get those dowels aligned. All right, so when you're bolting up a combo like this for the first time, it's always handy to check your converter pushback or pullback, whichever way you want to call it. It's basically the clearance of the converter when it's pushed all the way in to how much it has to pull back towards the flex plate. Now I can see with the converter pushed all the way in, it's about 3 to 4 mil of clearance between that and the flex plate, which according to Simon's instructions that he sent us is spot on. So good job, Simon. All right, we'll whack some bolts in there later, but let's finish bolting up the rest of the transmission. And then we'll do our converter bolts, and then we'll start exploring things like cross members and tail shafts. But yes, it's all coming together. All right, so I'm just going to remove the old transmission mount from this cross member, sit it up under the back end of the Turbo 400, and see where we need to position it for the right drive shaft angle and height. Okay, well, it's the Toyota mount. Save me, save me. Yeah, it's stuffed. Anyway, now we have that, which has been modified. All right, we'll see how it looks under there. Ooh, there's still some nuts in there. Right, so our Turbo 400 is loosely bolted in place. We've got a block of wood under the back of the trans at the moment, got the cross member in. We're going to have to sort out a way of mounting the back of the trans. GM transmission mounts are pretty simple, but still, this could be a little bit painful. But what we really need is the tail shaft, and we've set the tail shaft up in place, the one that we got, and it is pretty much the exact right length, which is amazing. But it has the wrong yoke on the front. So we're gonna have to send it back to GJ Drivelines, get them to put a Turbo 400 yoke on the front, and then we can position our transmission for the right drive shaft angle and all that business. So that is a job for future Scotty. So we brought the VN for a quick road trip down to GJ Drivelines. We've got our tail shaft here, which they built originally for the Trolvo. So we're going to get them to modify the front, put a Turbo 400 yoke on it, so that way we can get this to summon that slam as well. So let's convert it to Turbo 400, get in the car, get it to Summonats. Slam. Knock, knock. There you go. Just talking to Matt yesterday about this. This is the tail shaft from our Volvo that we've just put a Turbo 400 in it, so we need to put a Turbo 400 yoke on it.
Yep.
The shaft length is pretty much spot on.
How much power did it actually make?
We got it up to, well, made, according at Summonats, it said 490 horsepower at the tyres, at the hubs. So, but yeah, around on the normal chassis dyno, about 400 rear wheel horsepower. So
that's not trans brakes?
It will be.
I'll see what this tube's like after that's been rubbing. If it's got a bit of a wobble in it, I'll re-tube it.
Okay. Yeah, because the new box is trans brake.
Alright.
Of course it is.
And it won't flare on gears.
No. No, it won't. So you're familiar. There you go.
That's alright, I'll sort it out for you.
Cool, awesome.
Alright.
So now that we've got our Turbo 400 bolted in, it's time to do all the little nitty gritty stuff. We've got to sort out our trans mount. Now we've just got a normal GM generic mount for the back. It's bolted to the transmission, but it's not bolted to the cross member yet because none of the holes line up. So we've either got to modify this cross member or make another one. I'll decide what to do with that once we get our tail shaft, which is obviously at GJ. They're finishing that off. Once the tail shaft's in, then we can measure our tail shaft angle, pinion angle, all that sort of stuff. Make sure where we want to position the back of the transmission, whether it's going up or down or whatever, and then we'll make a judgment call on what we do with the cross member. Trans cable, like the shifter cable, it's an easy one because we already had a ratchet shifter in this thing, the Hurst Promatic, and it was a good thing with the A340, shifted gears nice and solidly. And what we've done is just basically use the appropriate mount, which was, you know, whenever you buy one of those ratchet shifters, they come with mounts for pretty much every transmission that you're going to use, you know, C4s, torque flights, Turbo 400s and all that sort of stuff. So there was a Turbo 400 bracket in there, which we bolted up. So there is a bit of a trick to adjusting these right, and you've got to get it right, because otherwise you can either damage the shifter or damage the transmission. You don't want to do either of those. So the best way to do it is pull it back into first gear, get your shift lever all the way back into first gear, adjust your cable up until, you know, you're on a nice kind of threaded part of it, and then screw your little pivot all the way back or to the point where it just slips in nice and easy to the shift lever. So that's first gear. And then you get your mate to go upstairs and shift it in a second, and then you check that it just slips nice and easy and that the shift lever's in its proper détente, all right? And then you repeat, third, neutral, reverse, park, making sure that each time the little pivot point actually just slips into the shift lever, easy as, no binding, nothing like that, and that the shift lever is in its détente position for every cycle. So to run it through a couple of times, check it each time. If it's right to go, attach your split pin and you're good to go. But it's important to check it, because if you don't do it and you just go, oh yeah, I'm just going to set it up in park and not run it through the gears, you could end up, you know, midway between gears at the end of the shift pattern, and the gearbox doesn't know where it's at, and then the fluid doesn't know what it's doing, you've got no line pressure, all your clutches go away. It's a bad day for everyone. So just take a bit of care with adjusting your shifter cable, and it will thank you for it later. What else have we got to deal with? We've got a dipstick tube that we've bought, but because I think I explained this before, it's a non-standard fitment, so the dipstick tube doesn't actually fit. Now I made a little bar that was going to bridge the gap, but unfortunately the tube sits high enough that it hits the body of the car. So we're going to have to bend the tube down into position so it fits. So we have our Turbo 400 all bolted up except for the rear trans mount. And to do the rear trans mount, we have to check for the height, so we need our tail shaft to check pinion angles and all that sort of stuff. So while we're waiting on the tail shaft to show up, we're going to put some springs in this thing. Yes, standard springs. Now the previous owner decided to cut a couple coils out of the springs to drop it on the deck, and yes, it looks fantastic dropped on the deck, but it is too low. The tail shaft hits the floor at times, and that has actually caused us a problem because the boys at GJ discovered the tail shaft actually had a bend in it, which is why it's taken a little longer than we expected. So we're going to raise it back up to stock height for the moment, and see where we're at with stock height springs in it, and then we can make a judgment on how far we will lower it properly. But in the meantime, it's going to Summonats with stock springs in it. We found a stock set from one of our mates. He actually had a set laying around, so we're going to put these in the Trolvo, and yes, it's going to sit up in the air a little bit like a four-wheel drive, but them's the brakes. So let's get to work on this. Change some springs. How easy is that? Okay. Right, that one in there. Tappity tap, job done. Well, nuts on, tighten up, then job done. Actually, am I even Australian if I don't shake it and go, that's not going anywhere? Anyway, job done. I wonder if it's possible to do them in the car. I mean, look at them. They're loose as.
Did you notice too the bottom is holding with a hose clamp?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Coming to us from the guy who also put wooden brake shoes in the front of the Barina. Because the springs are actually hanging loose in there and there's no pressure on them, I'm going to undo it straight from the strut top here. See if we can at least pull the old springs out. Maybe even squeeze the new ones in. We'll see. See if I can hold it in my hand. Yep. Oh, I just managed to put enough pressure on it. There we go. Yeah, that's definitely been cut a little bit. So we are about to drop this thing down, check our drive shaft angles, but we've also just put stock standard springs in this. So it's going to be interesting to see what the ride height is now. Is it going to sit up like a four-wheel drive? Probably will. But anyway, that'll make it easier to check our drive shaft angles, to be perfectly honest, because before it was really hard to get under this thing. Anyway, we'll drop it down. Probably could use some new struts, but yeah. Okay, she's a little bit high. That's all right. At least the drive shaft won't hit. So today is the big day. We have our new drive shaft from GJ Drivelines. Now originally we were just going to get them to put a new yoke on the old shaft, but they found that the other shaft had been hitting the floor, we knew that, and it had actually developed a bit of a bend in it. So they decided to go whole new shaft, chrome molly, bigger unis, front and rear, because they're worried about that trans brake. And yeah, everything in this drive shaft is brand new. There are no old parts in this. So let's put it in, see if it fits. We do have the old one stuck aside, so if we ever do decide to go back to A340 at any stage, you know, like we maybe sell the car and keep the turbo 400, who knows? Who knows? But let's trial this, make sure it fits. I'm sure it will. Slide her up in there. All right, you go up into there. Oh, slides in nice. Yep. And fits perfect at this end. All right, so if I rotate that slightly, yep, holes line up, or thereabouts, there we go. So, all right, that sits in there quite nice. All right, now it is time to do the rear mount for that transmission. That's the only thing that's stopping us from driving this at the moment, other than fluid. But we've sort of just sat the transmission down on a standard, you know, rubber GM trans mount on the cross member that we had. It all looks pretty good. I've done some initial angles up here in the air, and it kind of looks okay, but we really need to measure drive shaft angles while it's down sitting on the ground, and that's the important part. So we should do some measurements. This is a digital inclinometer, so basically it measures angles. At the moment I've got it set up to read on its side, so you know, when it gets to 0, it is perfectly 90 degrees to the ground. So we're going to whack that on the front of the engine and measure how much engine layback we have. So reach in here. So we're just going to set it up. It's got a magnet. We'll set it up on the front of the balancer, which is about as flat as a surface as you'll find on an engine. And that is showing up as 5.2 degrees is our measurement for that one. So we'll write that down and then we'll move on. Right, well, with it sitting on the tail shaft, we've got 0.95 degrees. So we'll write that one down, and then we've got to jack the car up, pull the tail shaft out, and measure the pinion angle for our final measurement. Okay, so it's come up at 4.8 degrees. So write that down, we'll put the figures in the calculator and see what we're dealing with. Now that we've got our angles, I'm going to jump on the spicerparts.com website. They've got this great driveline operating angle calculator. You jump in there and you put your measurements in and it spits out the gold. 5.25 for our first angle. Got to make sure we're on the downslope for all our calculations because the way this isn't a four-wheel drive. So 0.95 and then 4.80 for our last calculate. So we put our figures in and the answer isn't great. We want a number here of somewhere between 0.5 and 2. 385, 43, yeah, it's not great. So what we're going to have to do is probably jack up the back of the engine to lessen the angle of the engine. I think the engine's laying back a bit too much. Jack it up so we can improve our angles. So what we're going to do is check the engine angle, the drive shaft angle once again, see what it comes up as. If it's better, then I'll use the 45, the 40 mil. If it's worse, then we'll go to 45. But let's see how it looks with the 40 mil. So we've just spent the last 3 hours trying a whole bunch of different things to get these angles right. Now, we've worked out that if we raise the back of the transmission by 46 mils, we get an engine angle of 2.9 degrees, a drive shaft angle of 3.9 degrees, and the pinion angle is unchanged at 4.8 degrees. And you're probably wondering there, that's all good. What does it mean? Well, Spicer has 3 recommendations. One, the first recommendation is that your operating angle be no less than half a degree. Well, that would be 0.5, and you can see we're above that on both cases. Beautiful. They also say that you should have, your operating angles should have no more than a degree difference. Well, we're almost exact on both of them, so again, we're well within spec. And also that your drive shaft operating angles should be less than 3 degrees. Well, we're almost 1 degree, so again, thumbs up. So we've got this pretty much worked out perfectly. So now I'm just going to have to weld the bits together, create a mount out of this thing, and then we can go do some skits. Okay, Turbo 400 is done. Now, we've made up a transmission spacer for the mount, so we've got our normal GM mount up here. We've made this little spacer to space it up on our cross member. Everything clears. We've also wrapped the exhaust down past the trans pan here because it is very close. We are going to have to move that at some point. We're going to have to sort of put a bend in there and sort of jog it across a bit, just to keep it away from the trans pan, but for the moment the exhaust wrap will do the trick. So what are we up to? Basically, we need to put transmission fluid in this thing and send it. So unfortunately we didn't have a lot of choice in dipsticks at this time of the year. I mean, it's coming up on Christmas, everyone's closing down. Getting parts at this sort of last minute is always a bit of a problem. So our dipstick tube is right down there next to the dump pipe, which is a little bit annoying, but yeah, we will not want to check this when it's warm, that's for sure. Alrighty, let's go get some fluid. What fluid should we use? So now that the engine's nice and warm, I think it's time to do the old Michael Jackson. Check this trans fluid. Oh man, yeah, that sucks. Oh. All right, let's give it a little wipe. Send it back. Oh yeah, no, she's definitely still a little bit low. Well, what have we given it so far? 5 litres or more, so I think it needs probably another litre or 2. reverse works. My hands are legitimately shaking right now. Holy snapping duck shit. That is amazing. The car's a bit of a boat now with the standard springs. There's no doubt you're not going to be tipping this into corners really fast. So we will have to do something about that. But, oh my God, the difference between having a shit gearbox and a great gearbox is night and day. I am convinced that we have never had all the gears, all the power before. Now we do. Wow, I really am speechless. I'm like, this is genuinely fucking quick. It's now turbo taxi quick. That's how it feels. It feels turbo taxi quick in a chassis that's 20 years older. So it feels quite, I'm in danger. That's the way it feels. It's fast. It's like really fast. So I guess, where do we take it from here? We're going to take it back to Zane and see if we can make more power. So here we are, max performance with the Trolvo ready to rock. Now, the Turbo 400 is in and we've done some test passes in Mexico. Love your nachos. But we're here to see how this thing goes on the dyno with its new auto, new converter. The converter stalls up at about 3,300 RPM, which is great. So it comes on just as boost is coming on. So, you know, this thing's going to do real well at the drag strip when we put those drag radials on. But anyway, let's have a look at the history of this thing on the dyno. Now, the first time we brought it here, we pumped a heap of boost into it. Fair bit of timing, made 306 rear wheel kilowatts through a stock converter. Now that is the very important part there. Stock converter will transfer all the power through it. Higher stall converters will suck up a little bit more power. Bigger, heavier autos will even suck up more power. Now, we've had various autos in this thing and they've all sort of turned to jelly. Well, the Turbo 400 is not going to do that, but it is a big, heavy transmission and probably will suck up a little bit of power, and the high stall converter won't do it any favours either. But we should be able to get a good, solid power figure here. So I'm very keen to see what it makes as it sits, basically. So let's run it up, see what we're dealing with. It's with the new converter and everything is locking up better and loading it up.
Yeah, it's loading up even harder. It's making more power already, isn't it?
Yeah, it's making good power but leaning out. It feels fast.
Like Declan went like low 12, 220 kilowatts in a heavier car.
Yeah.
It's a 10-second car all day.
This feels quick. do you think of that? 289 rear wheel kilowatts. That is almost 390 horsepower at the tyres for those that speak dinosaur tech. But that is not too shabby. 21 pounds of boost out of 2.5 litres. It's making some steam, and yeah, new tech for the win. But we are starting to tap out the fuel system. It's only got a single pump in there. It's got a Deechworks pump that we got with the car when we bought it. It was just randomly sitting in a box, and we're like, yeah, we'll throw it in, see what it does. Well, it's doing okay. But we are starting to reach the limits of that pump. It's totally safe as it sits right now. 21 pounds with the fuel capacity it has right now, it's fine. And we're going to race it like that. But once we race it, see what it does, we're going to bring it back, put some extra pumps in it, maybe put some cams in it, and see where we can really take this thing. So you'll see all that on a future episode of Carnage.